Welcome back. In this session, we are going to create the pipeline. In order to create the pipeline, you come over to the Integrate Hub and click on the plus here and select Pipeline, and you get this UI where you can create your pipeline. So let me walk you through this very quickly. So on the right-hand side, you've got the properties of the pipeline itself, and name is mandatory and the description is optional. But I would still encourage you to give it a description. Let me give a name for our pipeline. I've called it a PL_create silver taxi zone. PL stands for pipeline, and we are clear in the taxi zone table in our silver zone. That's why I called it as this. And at the bottom, you've got the properties for the pipeline itself. And if you have any parameters which you are sending into the pipeline, you can create them here. And if you want to use any variables, you can create them here. And settings is where you can set the concurrency. So what that means is if you want only one occurrence of the pipeline to run at a time, then you set the concurrency to 1. Otherwise, as many as you want it to run at the same time, you do that here, and under output, you will see the output when you're debugging the pipeline. So that brings us to here. We talked about debug already, so you can debug a pipeline and the outputs will be shown here. And once you've created the pipeline, you can validate it as well. And if you want to add a trigger to the pipeline, you do it using this button here. And the last thing we've got is the activities, as we discussed previously. Pipeline is basically a set of activities put together. So in order to add an activity, you can pick them up from here. So as you can see here under Synapse, you've got a few activity. So you've got a notebook activity, Spark job definition, and SQL pool, stored procedure. And if you come and, for example, Databricks, you'll see all the Databricks activities you can use, and you've got some general activities as well. So things like lookups, get metadata, and things like that, and delete is the activity which we are going to use in a bit. And if you want to do any iterations and conditional activities, then you pick them up. From here, for example, you've got the for each filter and things like that. So there are a lot of activities are already available, and Microsoft has been adding activities into this all the time. So let's pick up the delete activity because that's the one we wanted to add to. So you just come here and then drag it into your pipeline. So that's all you need to do in order to create the activity. So as you may have seen, things at the bottom changed as soon as we dragged the delete activity here. When you select an activity at the bottom, what you see is the properties for the activity rather than the pipeline. If you wanted to add properties for the pipeline itself, you'll have to click outside of the activity. Then you'll bring back the options we had previously, which is the parameters, variables, and things like that for the pipeline. So when you are setting properties for the activity, click on the activity and you will see them here. And this changes depending on the activity because not all activities will have the same properties. So let's give a name for our activity. Name is the only mandatory option here. Let's leave the others as default and move on to the Source tab. This is where we specify the dataset, which represents the folder from which we want to delete the data from. So we've created one dataset already, if you remember. And if you click on the drop-down, that lists all the datasets which are available, that is the integration datasets, and you can pick the one you want. In our case, we only have this dataset. But you may notice that there is a plus new button which you can click to create the dataset if there isn't a dataset already available. So if I click on that one, that will give you the same base that we earlier went through to create our integration dataset. So instead of going into the Data Hub and creating the integration dataset, we could do it this way as well. But I wanted to make sure that you understand where to go and look for things. So whichever method you create your integration datasets at the end, they will all be listed under the Data Hub and under the tab here as the integration datasets. Let's go over here and then click on the drop-down and select the dataset, and that changes the options here. In our case, we've got the dataset with the right folder already specified, which is our taxi zone folder. So we don't need to change anything. But if you want to specify one layer list of files, for example, with a wildcard port, our list of files in a folder or anything like that, you can do all of those things. But I'm going to do all of these things as default. And let's move on to logging settings so you can enable logging and direct that to under the storage account. I'm going to disable that so we don't have to worry about all of these things. And you've got user properties as well, and you can create them here. I'm going to not worry about that. And with this we have created our pipeline already with the delete activity, which should delete the right data for us. So in order to test it, you can click on the debug and that should run the pipeline and delete the folder for us. So let me click refresh. And as you can see, it's already run through. And if you hover over the name, you will see these two arrows here. One is input, one is output. In this case, actually, there is not much in terms of input. It's just the dataset name and the logging we've specified and things like that. But if you are sending in any parameters and things like that, you will be seeing all of that information here as well. And for the output, you will be seeing what has happened. So this is the output from the delete activity itself. And as you can see, it's gone into the folder path NYC taxi data, silver taxi zone, and deleted all of the data. So as you can see here, it's deleted one folder as well. So this is how you create a pipeline with an activity and then be back to make sure that it works. Okay. Our status here is succeeded and it seems to have done the job. But let's just go back to the data hub. Make sure the data has actually been deleted from our storage account. So I'm in the data hub on the linked. I'm going into the default storage, which is our primary storage, and the data is under the NYC taxi data container. And let's open up the silver folder. And as you can see, the taxi zone folder is missing, but that's because that has been deleted and I can see all other folders. So pipeline has worked as expected, and that's the end of this lesson.